On a heavy June afternoon when the air over Ashwood Meadows felt like a damp towel draped over the whole neighborhood, thick with chlorine, sunscreen, and the high-pitched shrieks of kids jumping into the pool, I was standing in the community lot beside my black SUV, a clipboard in my hand, talking through some simple landscaping sketches with Oscar Rivera, a quiet contractor who clearly wanted no trouble with anyone. And my mind was on trees, shade, and sprinkler lines, nothing more, when a voice sliced through the noise so sharp that the whole world seemed to stumble. Flip-flops stopped slapping the concrete. Soda cans froze halfway to mouths. Conversations broke off mid-sentence as a woman yelled, "Who do you think you are standing there like you own the place?" And in an instant, every head in that pool lot swung toward me like someone had just flipped on a spotlight. I turned slowly, because a black man in a mostly white neighborhood learns early that moving slow is sometimes the only kind of armor he gets. And I saw her marching across the asphalt with her jaw locked tight, sandals smacking in angry rhythm, eyes narrowed with the kind of confidence that doesn't come from any real authority, just from years of people being too tired to push back. And that woman was Linda Caro, the self-appointed sheriff of Ashwood Meadows, the storm cloud everybody pretended not to notice until she was parked directly over their roof. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low and even, the way you do when you can feel phones pointing at you, when you know this might not just be a moment, it might be a clip. "This lot is for members only," Linda snapped, stopping just a few feet from me, close enough that I could smell the bitter edge of old coffee on her breath. "Not for strangers. Not for people dragging in contractors who don't belong here." And beside me, Oscar shifted awkwardly, tugging the brim of his Panthers cap down, folding his sketches up like he hoped he could disappear behind paper. "I live here," I told her, still measured, still careful. "My family and I just moved into the house on Cedar Hollow Court last week." "That's not what I heard," she shot back immediately, her chin tilting upward like a prosecutor who just found her favorite piece of evidence. "You're renting, and renters don't get the same privileges. Move your car before I call security." And while she spoke, the whole space tightened. Kids clutching damp towels stopped walking. Teenagers quietly turned their cameras toward us. Parents leaned forward in their lounge chairs. And I could feel that familiar pressure of being put on trial in public without anyone saying the word. "I'm reviewing plans for my property," I said, steadying my breath. "We'll be done in a few minutes." "Don't you talk down to me," she hissed, taking another step into my space, almost daring me to react. "I've lived here 18 years. I know who belongs, and you don't." And I could feel my pulse thudding against the cotton of my shirt, feel the heat of every staring eye on my skin. "Please back up," I answered quietly. "You're too close." And I meant it in every way a person of color means it when someone decides they are entitled to invade his space and still call it order. Her cheeks flushed a deep, furious red. Her chest rose once, sharply, and then, in a small, quick motion that barely made a sound, Linda leaned forward and spat. A tiny wet click that landed on my shirt like a hammer, warm and deliberate, spreading into the fabric in a slow, ugly bloom. The lot went silent. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the electric kind that has a heartbeat. A teenage girl near the gate whispered, "Oh my God, I got that on video." Oscar jerked back like he'd just watched a car crash. And somewhere behind me, I heard a man mutter, "She finally crossed the line." Like everyone had seen this coming but hoped they were wrong. I looked down at the damp stain spreading across my shirt, watched it for a breath, then lifted my eyes to hers and said, each word laid out like a piece of evidence, "You spat on me, in front of everyone here." "I did what I had to do," she replied, folding her arms across her chest like she was proud of herself, not a flicker of regret in her face. "People like you think you can show up and change everything. Not in this neighborhood." And those 3 words, "people like you," drifted over the pool lot like smoke, thin but choking, and nobody could pretend they didn't understand what she meant. Around us, the crowd shifted uneasily. Someone near the lounge chairs muttered, "She's gone too far." Another voice said, "She's been like this for years, now it's on camera." And I stood there with spit drying on my shirt and a choice sitting in my chest, because I knew this wasn't just about my pride. It was about what my kids would learn watching me. 2 weeks earlier, when our moving truck rolled under the stone entrance of Ashwood Meadows, my wife Rachel Miles had looked out at the tree-lined sidewalks, the tidy lawns, the the quiet cul-de-sacs, and said under her breath, "Maybe this is it. Maybe we finally get to just live." And our kids, Malik and Ava, had exploded out of the car arguing over bedrooms, talking about basketball hoops in the driveway, about bike rides with kids they hadn't even met yet, while I stood in the driveway staring at our new house and let myself believe, just for a moment, that this place might be different. Even that first morning, though, I saw the signs, curtains twitching as we unloaded boxes, a car slowing just a little too much when it passed our address, and that same woman, Linda, standing across the street with her arms crossed, watching our front door the way a security camera watches a store. "Who's that?" Rachel asked quietly as she peeked through the blinds. "No idea," I said, catching only a glimpse of that tight mouth and hard stare. "But she looks like she thinks she owns the place," and we laughed, but it was the nervous kind of laugh that already knows it might not be a joke. Over the next several days, she didn't fade into the neighborhood. She became part of the background tension, tugging her dog to the other side of the street when I passed on my morning runs, leaving a flyer about street parking violations tucked under the wiper of Rachel's brother's truck when he stopped by to help us unpack. And before I'd even finished setting up my home office, emails had already gone to the HOA asking whether I'd submitted landscaping plans, as if the shrubs in my imagination were a threat to the property values she claimed to protect. Neighbors started sharing their own stories in that quiet way people do when they realize you might understand. One man told me she'd reported his son's basketball hoop for being left out overnight. Another said she'd called animal control because a cat sat on her lawn for 10 minutes. A woman confessed that she'd invited Linda over for coffee once, hoping to clear the air, and got a lecture about how her curtains were too sheer for a family neighborhood. And the same line kept coming up. "She's not even on the board, but she acts like she wrote the bylaws." And everybody shrugged, because fighting her seemed harder than enduring her. One night, sitting at the kitchen table with Rachel, I said, "People like her only get away with this because nobody pushes back in daylight." And she frowned, thumbs circling the rim of her mug, and asked, "So what are you going to do?" And I told her, "I'm not going to bow to a bully, not at work, not in the street, and definitely not in front of our kids." And I meant it. But even I didn't imagine the confrontation would come with spit and cameras in a pool parking lot. By the next morning, the clip had already started making its rounds. Grainy phone footage of Linda stalking toward me, yelling, spitting, me standing there with my jaw clenched and my voice steady. And my phone lit up with messages from coworkers, old friends, cousins I hadn't heard from in months. "Press charges, don't let this slide. I'm so sorry this happened." But the question that mattered most came from across my own breakfast table, where Malik sat poking at his eggs instead of eating them. "Dad," he asked quietly, eyes fixed on the stain that was no longer on my shirt, but still very much in his mind. "Why does she hate us so much?" And I pulled him closer, feeling that familiar ache behind my ribs, and said, "Some people are afraid of change. Some people try to control what they don't understand. What she did says a lot more about her than it does about us." And he nodded, but I could see it. The way something in him had shifted, the way childhood had moved 1 inch further away. "So what's your move?" Rachel asked, and I answered, "I've already filed a formal complaint with the HOA. I'm not letting this turn into whispers and rumors. Not this time." And that was the moment the whole thing stopped being just about me and Linda and became about what kind of community Ashwood Meadows was going to be. The Ashwood Meadows HOA meetings used to be the kind of sleepy Tuesday night gathering nobody remembered until the email reminder showed up. 10 chairs occupied by retirees arguing about mulch and mailbox paint. But the night after that video circulated, the clubhouse parking lot looked like a sold-out show, cars lining both sides of the street, neighbors hurrying inside, the air buzzing with low whispers, and the scrape of extra chairs being unfolded. Inside, the room smelled like burnt coffee and chlorine seeping in from the pool. People lined the walls when the seats ran out, and at the front table sat Ethan Cho, the HOA secretary, his glasses sliding down his nose as he pretended to read the printed agenda everybody knew was irrelevant now. Linda was there early, naturally, sitting rigid in the front row in a crisp white blouse, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line, staring straight ahead like she'd been wronged. Not like she was the one who had sent spit flying across a parking lot. And when Rachel and I walked in, some neighbors gave me quick nods, some reached out to squeeze my shoulder, one whispered, About time somebody stood up to her. When the room finally settled, Ethan cleared his throat and said, "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. We have several items on the agenda tonight, but first we need to address what happened at the pool lot on Saturday." And a murmur rolled through the crowd as heads turned toward Linda, who kept her eyes fixed on some point on the wall, and then Ethan added, "Before we do that, I'd like to formally introduce our new HOA president, elected earlier this month before his move was finalized. Please welcome Jordan Miles." And in that instant, I felt the whole room shift, like air pressure changing before a storm, because the man they'd seen on their phones with a stained shirt and tight jaw was now the man sitting at the head of the table. A few people gasped outright, some started clapping, others just looked between me and Linda with wide eyes, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something like shock crack through her composure. I stood, rested my hands on the table, felt all those eyes lock onto me, and said, "Most of you only know me from that video, from a moment that never should have happened. I don't need to replay every second of it. You've all seen enough. But I will say this, no one in this neighborhood, whether they've lived here 18 years or 18 days, whether they own or rent, should ever be spat on, humiliated, or treated like a trespasser for standing in a lot they help pay for, in a place they call home." And as I spoke, I saw heads nod, shoulders straighten, shame flicker across a few faces that had watched Linda in silence for too long. Her hand shot up. "I have a right to respond," she said, and Ethan gave a cautious nod. "Go ahead, Linda." She stood, smoothed her blouse with jittery hands, and started talking fast, saying she'd been defending the rules, that I'd been using community space for business, insisting she had every right to confront me, admitting she had overreacted, but insisting I wasn't innocent, jabbing a finger toward me like I was a threat to the order of the universe. And before she could land the story the way she wanted, a voice from the back cut through. "You spit on him. We all saw it." And another neighbor added, "You've harassed us for years. Basketball hoops, trash cans, curtains. Enough is enough." And I watched something in her eyes shift from defiant to cornered. "This isn't about taking sides," I said when the noise started to swell. "It's about respect. We all pay dues. We all live under the same bylaws, and every one of us deserves to feel at home without being policed or humiliated. What happened to me is not a one-off. It's a symptom of something this community has tolerated. People feel watched instead of welcomed. That ends now." And the applause that followed wasn't wild. It was firm, like the sound of a decision settling into place. From there, the work stopped being dramatic and started being detailed, the way real change always is. Long after that meeting, when the buzz died down, I sat with Ethan and a few other board members, combing through the bylaws, drafting a civility code for meetings, an anti-harassment clause for anyone enforcing rules, a complaint process with clear timelines and written responses, nothing flashy enough for a clip, but everything important enough to change how power worked here. The first test of all that landed on my desk in the form of an architectural request from Emily and Chris Porter, a young couple on Sycamore Lane who had just adopted a big, anxious rescue dog that could clear a 4-foot fence without even trying. They wanted approval for a 6-foot privacy fence, which the bylaws allowed with board consent, but tradition, meaning whatever Linda liked, had always kept fences at 4 feet. And before the ink on their request had dried, she was out walking, door to door, warning anyone who'd listened that 6-foot fences would ruin the sight lines and turn the neighborhood into a maze of walls, whispering at one stop, "Today it's fences, tomorrow it's chicken coops," feeding fear and pretending it was foresight. At the mailboxes, Brian Holt, a neighbor who'd once called Linda our resident storm warning, pulled me aside and said, "She's telling people you're about to greenlight chaos." And I shrugged and answered, "Chaos is letting unwritten tradition override written rules." And he laughed, "Put that on a sign." That evening I walked over to the Porter's house, took off my president hat, and just listened. Emily describing how their dog shook during thunderstorms and bolted at loud noises. Chris showing me photos of a huge animal curled into corners just to feel safe. And I asked about their lot line, about materials, about how high they really needed. And I walked home with a simple truth in my pocket. Safety is not disorder, safety is care. At the meeting where their request came up, I let them speak first. Then I opened the bylaws in front of everyone and said, "The rules allow a 6-foot fence with board approval. Our job is to apply what's written, not whatever has been shouted the longest. And when Linda shot to her feet and declared it was against community standards and would make us look like prison yards, I nodded once and said, tradition helps when the rules are vague and hurts when it's used to block needs that clearly fit the rulebook. Then offered a compromise, 6 feet allowed, good neighbor side facing the street, stained to match existing fences, clear sight lines preserved at corners. And when the vote passed and the porters exhaled in relief, I saw a realization flicker across the room, the understanding that Linda's word was not law anymore. She didn't vanish after that. People like her rarely do. Instead, a plain white envelope appeared on my porch with a single printed line inside. New presidents don't last if they forget who built this place. And soon after, her allies were going door to door with a petition to censure me, claiming my civility code restricted free expression, insisting the fence decision would destroy property values, carefully rewriting the story so that she was the guardian of order and I was the reckless newcomer. And when Brian came to warn me, I didn't panic. I sat down and wrote a calm, factual response with bylaw citations, meeting dates and recorded votes, sent it to Ethan and said, if her petition reaches the board, this is the record. And he replied, you'll have the floor first. But in the end, it wasn't her petition that broke the spell, it was another video. One morning, phones across Ashwood Meadows lit up with a new clip, grainy footage from a neighbor's upstairs window, showing Linda Caro standing on the curb outside my house at 12:03 a.m., framed in the yellow glow of a street lamp, not knocking, not talking, just pointing her phone at my home, slowly panning across our windows like she was documenting enemy positions. And the clip didn't need commentary. It just needed a timestamp. Everybody understood what it meant. It meant obsession. It meant intimidation. It meant this wasn't about rules anymore. This was about control. The HOA inbox flooded with messages. This has gone too far. If this isn't harassment, what is? I don't want to live in a place where anyone thinks this is okay. And I didn't run to the neighborhood Facebook group. I didn't post a speech. I walked into Ethan's office, set the printed still frame on his desk, and said, this isn't about hurt feelings. This is about whether my family gets to sleep without someone surveilling us at midnight. I'm requesting an emergency board session. And he looked at that picture of Linda under the street lamp and said, you'll have it by Friday. Friday night. The clubhouse was so packed that people were standing in the hallway and pressing up against the glass windows, the air thick with the awareness that something old and rotten was finally going to be named out loud. And when the board took their seats, I stood with that still frame in my hand and said, this is what my children woke up to this week. A neighbor standing outside our house after midnight, filming our home. This is not enforcement. This is not concern for bylaws. This is harassment and intimidation. And this community has let versions of this go on for too long. Murmurs rippled through the room, not confused, but angry and tired. A woman near the back called out, she did that outside my house last year. I just didn't have proof. Another man said, she's been stalking us in the name of rules, and we all just lived with it. And Linda, gripping a thick binder in the front row like a shield, jumped up and shouted, I was documenting a violation. Their porch light was too bright. It violates the exterior lighting rules, as if there were a line anywhere in those bylaws that said midnight stakeouts were part of being a good neighbor. I opened the book on the table, read the short section about reasonable efforts to reduce glare, then looked at the room and said, there is a difference between caring about standards and weaponizing them. Standing outside someone's home in the middle of the night to film them is not enforcement. It is fixation, and I don't care who it's aimed at. It has no place in this community. We had done our homework, drafted a conduct resolution, and reviewed it with council. And that night the board read it out loud. A motion that barred Linda Caro from serving in any official or unofficial enforcement capacity, prohibited her from confronting neighbors directly about alleged violations, required her to submit complaints in writing only, and explicitly forbade her from loitering outside homes for surveillance, with a clear note that any further behavior like that would trigger formal legal action. And as each line was read, I saw years of tension bleed out of people's shoulders. The board voted, one hand after another going up in favor. The motion passed, and a low, steady applause filled the room, not triumphant, just relieved, and Linda stood there looking smaller than I had ever seen her, binder sagging at her side, staring at a neighborhood that had finally decided her fear-based rule was worth less than everyone else's right to feel safe. In the weeks that followed, contrary to the apocalypse she'd promised, Ashwood Meadows did not collapse into chaos. Lawns stayed trimmed, kids still rode their bikes, property values didn't crash, but something important shifted. People waved more, actually talked at the mailboxes, came to meetings to offer ideas instead of bracing for conflict. Kids shot hoops in their driveways without someone photographing the backboard like it was contraband, and new families unpacked their trucks without feeling like they had to pass a silent inspection. Linda didn't vanish. She still walked her dog, still drove slowly past houses that offended her private sense of order. But now when she stopped too long or stared too hard, other neighbors stepped in and said, "If you have a problem, send an email to the board like everyone else." And that simple sentence, more than any policy, told me that something fundamental had changed. The spit came out of that shirt in the wash, but the moment never really left me. It became a line I measure my choices against. The day I had to decide whether I was going to teach my kids that you survive people like Linda by shrinking and ducking your head, or that you change things by standing your ground and fixing the rules that let her act that way in the first place. And I chose the second path, slow, procedural, sometimes exhausting, but real. In the end, she faced what I'd call HOA justice, not sirens or handcuffs, but something that cut just as deep for someone like her. She lost the ability to wield the rules like a weapon, lost the fear that had been her favorite tool, lost the power to walk into any room and assume everyone would fall in line. And maybe one day she'll understand why that had to happen. Maybe she won't. But the neighborhood is different now. And on quiet mornings when I jog past the pool lot where all this started, I still ask myself one question that doesn't have an easy answer. In a community like ours, when someone crosses the line from concerned neighbor to self-appointed tyrant, how far should we go to protect their dignity, and how far must we go to protect everyone else's? Where is the line between mercy and enabling? And when justice finally comes, is it enough to take away their power? Or do we owe them one more chance to change, even after they've spit on everything a community is supposed to be?